Hi guys, welcome. We'll give it another few seconds before we get started. Let some people roll in. Seeing some names. I will set all my notifications to do not disturb so that you guys don't have to hear them. All right, why don't we get started and we will let people roll in as we do the introductory stuff. Welcome to our latest Toolkit webinar. I don't know which one this is at this point, number 6, number 7 maybe. Before we start, a couple things. My name is Tanaz, if you don't know me. I am on the street team at Shotgun, and I'm kind of a Toolkit specialist on that team. Before we start, a couple things. There's a Q&A box that you can add your questions to, so feel free to type in questions into this thing as we go through the webinar, and we'll have time for Q&A at the end. If they do seem like clarification-y ones that we want to we want to cover in the middle of the webinar, I'll do that. And then the other thing, just real quick, I wanted to mention, so Rob Blau, who is our product manager, is going to be doing a webinar with Foundry next week about if you make me a panelist, we'll make Manny a panelist. Our work that we're doing with Ethera, which is their like pipeline and cloud stuff. So stay tuned for details on that on the Shotgun dev list.
Yep, I'll post something there.
What's that?
I'll post details over there. So kind of Shotgun integration.
Rob will post there. And if you're not on the Shotgun dev list, let me put the link. You should be. It's our Google group for our technical users of Shotgun. It's a wonderful place to collaborate and learn what people are doing. Always very cool stuff. And that's that. So with that, I think we can get started. Today we have JF, Jean-Francois Boismenu, who's one of our senior engineers who's been working on Toolkit for a few years. He's talking about the Publish API. So by this point, hopefully you guys are familiar with the new publisher that isn't necessarily that new anymore, and all of its like awesome plugin architecture and all the cool things that you can do with it. Up until recently, the process of running those plugins was tied into the UI. So we didn't really have a way of running that logic headlessly. With the latest release of the Publish 2, we have kind of slowly ripped out the guts and replaced them in such a way that you can actually run publishes headlessly. You can run them programmatically from your own tools. You can pass a tree of publish items from one thing that's running to another, from one process that's running to another. So you can actually like pass it to a farm job. It's really the most exciting thing to do with that. But I am already botching it up, so I will hand it off to JF and he will talk you through that process. All yours, JF.
Hi everyone, so welcome to the Publish API webinar. So today we'll be covering all the latest changes we've made to our publisher. So for those who don't know me, my name is Jean-Francois Boismenu. I'm a senior software developer at Autodesk. I've been here for almost 15 years now in January. I've worked on multiple products, including Autodesk Toxic, Luster, and Maya, and I've been focusing on Shotgun Toolkit and the Shotgun ecosystem for the past 4 years. So we've often heard on our various support channels that you'd like to have help with publishing on a render farm, whether it's how to write a script to render some frame from the farm or how to submit a job from the publisher. It seemed like there's a lot of hunger around this type of information. So we believe that with the release of last year's, with the release last year of our new publisher and with the introduction of our Publisher API, that we now have a compelling story to tell about publishing on the farm, and this is what the webinar will be about. The Publish API has been built on top of the Toolkit platform, so it is deeply integrated with Shotgun concepts like published files and templates. We've developed a Publish application on top of the API, so all the logistics of publishing files are accessible from it. This means that you can get rid of the UI, and then you still get access to all the powerful features of the publisher, collection, validation, publishing, finalizing, and the newfound capability of persisting and reloading the published tree for later use. And because you have access to the complete feature set, this means that you could, in theory, write your own one-button submit publisher. So let's take a look at what we'll be building today. So as you can see, I'm currently running Maya, and I have a really nice looking cube. And now we're going to open up the publisher. If you look closely, you'll notice that there's an item in the publish tree that says Publish Alembic. When we click on it, you can see that there is actually a simple submission UI that allows us to send that task to the farm. This means that the rendering of the files and the creation of the publishing shotgun will take place on render farm. It is clicked by default, obviously, because we don't want artists to have to wait for the caches to be generated. Now we'll hit publish, and you'll notice that the publisher is just going to blaze through the publishing of the Alembic files because it's actually sending something to the render farm. We'll now click at the lower left of the dialog to get to the publish logs. And if we scroll down those logs, you'll see that there's an entry saying that the published task has been sent to the farm. And there's also a little message right underneath that says that some information was persisted on disk to help send the published job to the farm, and there's a show folder button. So we'll click on that button, and you can see the files that were actually saved out to disk. We'll open them inside our favorite text editor. And there, in the first file called dccstate.txt, it lists out all the information that you need in order to be able to reopen that scene inside in your batch job, and also all the toolkit state that you need to restore. Then there's a second file called publishtree.txt, and it's just a massive wall of text. It contains the entire published tree, items, and tasks. If we look for the word farm, you'll see that there is a setting named submit to farm, which is the checkbox we clicked earlier in the demo, and now it is currently set to true. On the second half, let's take a look at what would be happening on the render farm. So a script would be launched. It will, obviously first, read the information about the DCC that we saved to disk. We'll then launch the Maya engine, which takes a while, and now there's going to be a massive wall of text because the VP2 renderer is not happy of being run in headless mode. So once that wall of text is gone, you'll see that it's going to open up the current scene, and then it's going to start rendering and publishing the Alembic files to Shotgun. All right, so now that we know what we will be building today, let's talk about the areas we'll be covering. I'll first take you through on how to build a user experience inside the publisher to submit things on the farm. Then we will show you how you can package all that information required to recreate the current state of the DCC on the render farm. And then finally, we'll show how a render farm can take that information and publish the files with a custom script. But first, we'll do a quick recap on how the publisher works to make sure that everybody knows what it's capable of. So the publisher actually goes through 4 different phases when it's publishing something. There's the collection and acceptance phase. There's the validation phase, the publishing phase, and the finalization phase. We'll now get into details of what each of these phases mean. So when you load up the publisher, there's a toolkit called the collector. The collector will scan your scene for interesting items and tag them inside the publish tree. This is entirely customizable, and sky is pretty much the limit to how rich the data coming out of the collector can be. So here we can see that the collector has found the current Maya scene, so it creates an item in the tree and tags it. Then the collector has found some geometry, so it creates an item for that as well. Now let's pretend we have 3 published plugins configured with the publisher. There's a scene, an Alembic, and a Playblast publisher. Publish plugin, sorry. Each of these can accept items with certain tags. So for every item in the tree, the publisher will try to find published plugins that can create a task for it. In our example, the publisher will be first looking for published plugins that can accept the main scene file. The scene publisher says that it does accept it, and the task will be created underneath the Maya scene item. Next, the publisher is looking for published plugins that can accept session geometry. The Alembic plugin says that it does accept it, and a task is created underneath the geometry item. And now we're done, and you'll notice that the publisher didn't get to submit anything because there wasn't any playblast associated with that scene. So once the collection and acceptance phase is done, now it's time for the validation phase. When validating, each plugin will simply look at each associate task and make sure that everything is ready to be published. So as you can see here, the validation failed because the current scene has never been saved. So we can proceed with publishing. Next step will be publishing. It will go through every single task and execute them. So a publish can be anything. You could be publishing the current scene, exporting the camera, or even submit a job to a farm, right? Finally, we have the finalization phase. During that phase, each plugin can do some extra work. It can be used for example, undoing some changes that were done to the scene at publish time, or it may be used for versioning up a scene file so that the artist can start working on a new copy of the file. All right, so now brace yourselves, remove your flip-flops, put on your swimming goggles and cap, because we're about to dive into the deep end, into code. All right, so first I'd like to cover a bit how we're going to write our farm submission code. We could jump straight into an existing plugin and start adding code to it to build this the render farm logic, but that would be pretty complicated. I for one wouldn't have to modify each of my publish hooks in the future to send something to the farm. That approach won't scale. What if I had tens of plugins I wanted to update to submit to my farm? This would become very complicated to maintain. So instead, we'll try to solve the farm submission puzzle by creating a script that can wrap any plugin, and then it can be reused over and over and over with all our published scripts. So the first step of this journey is to create the submission UI for a task. So for this step, we'll be adding a setting to the hook, and then we'll create a UI that allows us to toggle that setting. So first, we'll build our farm submission code on top of the latest version of tk-config default 2, which is 1.1.15, if I recall correctly, which we released last week. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new folder underneath hooks called tk-multipublish2, and then we'll create a hook underneath it, and we'll name it farmwrapper.py. This is where we will implement part of our farm submission logic. With every single method we'll be implementing as part of this webinar will be stubbed out. And now we're going to edit our configuration so that the publisher can use our hook. So we'll browse over to environment, includes settings, tk-multipublish2.yaml. We'll scan down to Maya asset steps section, and then we will rename the publish to shotgun to publish to Alembic to make it more stand out in the publish tree and inside our logs. Then we'll add our new hook at the end of the inheritance chain of our Alembic publish plugin. And with this change, the publisher will now be able to see our code. All right, so now we're going to open up the farm wrapper hook and we're going to start editing. So as I said earlier, we're going to start by adding a custom setting. So we'll override the settings property. And we're obviously going to make sure that we get all the properties from the base class because we need to expose those as well. And then we'll merge in our own settings. So here we have a Boolean setting called submit to farm, and it will be used to track the state of our checkbox. And once we're done, we just return everything. Now let's build our UI. Most of you are probably not familiar with custom UIs for the publisher, so we'll go through how those works first. So first, obviously, when the publisher wants to display a UI of a task, it will first call create settings widget. And then once that's done, it will call the set UI settings and pass in all the settings for every task that was selected in the publish tree. When the selection changes in the publish tree and your UI goes away, then the get UI settings method is called to update each task that was unselected. If multiple tasks were unselected, then the settings returned by the method will be applied on every single task. Note that you do not have to return every settings from the plugin, as those new settings will be merged with the previous ones instead of replacing them altogether. All right, so now let's write the create settings widget method. So this one's actually pretty easy. We're returning an instance of something called a farm wrapper widget. So let's see what it is. It's a pretty, dirt simple widget. It basically has a $init method where we create a checkbox and a description label to just tell the user what the checkbox is about. And then there's a pair of property methods to just edit that checkbox state and return its state. So this way we're kind of abstracting all the Qt stuff away from the rest of our plugin code. So now let's dive back to our get and set UI settings methods. So as you can see, the get UI settings method is actually pretty straightforward here. We simply return the state, true or false, of our widget. As for set UI settings, there isn't much either. However, I said earlier that you could add support for multi-selection to your plugin's UI. This is actually not mandatory. Here, I've chosen not to do so to keep the code simple, and I'm raising a not implemented error when there are more than one settings in the settings array. What you see here on the right-hand side is actually what is going to show up in the publisher when you select more than one thing with my plugin. Finally, once we've validated that there's only one task, we'll simply change the status of the widget to the task setting. That's it. All right, so let's look at what we've just done. So before launching the publisher, I'd like to share a little tip on how to test your code inside your DCC. So some of you are probably familiar with the reload and restart menu item in Shotgun menu, which allows you to load your more recent Python changes into Maya without having to restart it from scratch. What I like to do when I work on a tool is create myself a simple shelf button. In it, I put some Python code that will reload and restart Toolkit, and then it will launch my application. So that's a pretty cool trick. So then, I can easily switch back to Maya, hit one button, and my app appears right away with my latest changes. So now, if I go and click on the Alembic publish task, I can see that it has a checkbox with our check mark in it. So the next step is to modify the task publication logic. So for this step, we'll want to make sure that the hook takes into account our farm submission setting when publishing. This way, the plugin will be able to decide when it actually needs to publish. Is it locally or on the render farm? Oops, did this work? Oh, okay, sorry. I hit something wrong. I don't know. So for this step, we'll need to look into which part of the publishing we want to take over. As far as the publish tasks are concerned, there are 3 phases we can take over. The first one is validation. This one we could actually be running both on the DCC or on the farm, so we're not going to override this method. However, the publishing and finalizing, they go hand in hand because they are about taking the current scene, doing something to it, and then potentially cleaning it up. So obviously, these will need to be taken over because these are the steps that we may want to run either locally or on our render farm. So let's take a look at the publish method of our hook. As you'll see, the logic is pretty straightforward. The code says that if we are currently submitting something to the farm, we'll save the current user in the local properties of the item. We'll get to why we are saving this user a little bit further in 2 slides. So if we're not submitting something to the farm and publish was just called, it means that we're inside the DCC or we are actually on the render farm. So we just call to the base class and let it do its thing about, let it do its thing. Figuring out if you're submitting to the farm right now is pretty simple. You'll need to check that setting that we introduced a couple of slides back and check if you are on the local computer. So checking if you're on a local computer can be done many different ways. For the purpose of this demo, I kept it pretty simple. I'm simply checking if I'm in batch mode, and if I am, then I'll assume that I'm on the farm, but obviously in your own setup, it might be more complicated. So back to the user we saved 2 slides earlier. When you're running the publisher inside Maya, you've generally launched Maya from the Shotgun desktop, and you have authenticated with your username and password. This is what we call user-based authentication. The render script that will be running on the farm, however, will not be run by you. It will be using something called script-based authentication. This means that any updates done to Shotgun by the script will be associated with the script. The problem here is that we want our publishers to be associated with the user who submitted the job. So here we're implementing the method getPublishUser, which is invoked when a publisher is created. All right, so now let's see how we implement this. The publish method has been called, and we need to know who is publishing. So if this method is being called on my local computer, then it's because the user decided not to submit the job to the farm, and then we can just fall back to calling the base class and rely on the built-in functionality. If we're not on the local computer, however, it means we're actually running on the farm now. So we should not rely on the default implementation, and we'll return the job submitter that we saved 2 slides ago. All right, so finally, we have the finalize method. So this method is, once again, pretty straightforward to implement. It doesn't have anything special to do. So if you are submitting to the farm, it doesn't have anything to do because you're just submitting, so therefore there's nothing to finalize. But if you're not submitting to the farm, it's because either you're rendering inside the DCC or you are rendering on the farm. Therefore, you need to finalize. So let's see what we have now. We can now publish our scene, and when we go to the logs, we can see that it says that our alembics have been submitted to the farm. All right, next step, we'll be submitting to the farm. This time, we're going to save all the information about the current status of Maya, and we're going to submit a job to our render farm with that information. To accomplish this, we'll want to create something called a post-phase hook. The post-phase hook is called after the last 3 phases of the publisher, which by now, you probably are bored to death about repeating those. They are validation, publishing, and finalization. For our scenario, we'll want to submit the job to the farm when publishing is completed on the local computer. At that point, we know that everything that needed to be published locally has been published, and we can now save the publish tree for publishing in the farm. So now we are going to add a new hook inside our hooks tk multi-publish2 folder, and we're going to call it farm submission.py. We'll stub out the functionality for now. And then we'll need to go and edit our configuration to add our hook to the publisher. So once again, we'll browse down to environment includes settings.yaml. We're going to scroll down to my asset step, and we're going to add a post-phase hook. There's actually no post-phase hook by default, so we'll have to add the setting ourselves and then add a hook. Note that we're also adding the default post-phase hook in the inheritance chain because we're not implementing all the phases. We'll only be concerned with the post-publish. All right, so now let's jump into the code for the post-publish. So first thing we're going to make sure, obviously, is we want to make sure that this isn't being invoked from the render farm. So if this is not running locally, we're going to skip it. We don't want to submit something twice. Then we'll need to make sure that there is actually something that needs to be sent to the farm. So to do this, we'll simply iterate over all the tasks of all our items in the tree, and then we'll figure out if there is something to be submitted. And then finally, we'll capture the current state of Maya. So we'll retrieve the currently open scene. We'll retrieve the pipeline configuration ID so that we know which pipeline configuration to use on our farm. We'll retrieve the context so that we can reopen the scene inside the right Toolkit environment. And then we'll save the app and engine instance name to know which app and engine to run and get the settings from. And now we're ready to submit to the farm. So let's see what our farm submission logic looks like. So the submission part is actually going to be dirt simple here because we're not actually submitting to a render farm. Our goal here today is to show you how you can package information about Maya or whatever DCC you're using and Toolkit for the rendering farm. So we'll only be saving all that required information to launch the job to the farm. You guys can figure out that part that actually sending. You guys are the expert, I should say, for actually using the farm. All right, so first we'll save the publish tree to a given location. So this is pretty simple. You see, you're being passed in the tree, so you just call save file to it, and you save it to wherever you want it to be saved. Then you will write out a YAML file with all the Maya, all the DCC state information that we saw on the previous slide. And then finally, we'll log a message saying that all the files have been written to disk, and we'll add a parameter named extra to the log call. This parameter will be intercepted by the publisher, and the UI for the show folder button in the logs. This parameter will be intercepted by the publisher, and in the logs for the publisher, there will be a button called show folder, which will take you straight to that location. So now we're done with our post facehook. So let's see it in action. Once everything has been published, we'll go over to the logs, and then we can see that something has been submitted to the farm, and there is also that show folder button I was telling you about. All right, so this is the final step of our journey to the render farm. We'll now be restoring the state from Maya and Toolkit, render, and publish on the render farm. Note that for this part of the submission process, the script will not be part of the configuration because it needs to be run on the farm before you even have a configuration. So in order to be able to track versions of that file and include it inside the repo of my configuration, but in practice, this file will live somewhere on your network or directly on your render nodes. All right, so let's see what this render farm script needs to do. So first, it will be retrieving the DCC state we saved to disk. Then it will launch Toolkit and the Maya engine. Then it will be loading up the scene. And then finally, it will publish everything that needs to be published on the farm. So for now, we're going to focus on the two most important functions here, which are Bootstrap Toolkit and Publish Items. All right, so let's take a look at Bootstrap Toolkit. First, you'll want to create a script user so that you can authenticate with Shotgun. Here, we are retrieving the credentials from environment variables, which is always good from a security standpoint. Then, we will initialize our Toolkit manager with that user and assign the pipeline configuration ID so that you can load the right one. And then just prior to launching the engine, we'll want to make sure that the infamous path cache has been synced. So we'll register a pre-engine start callback that synchronizes the path cache. And then finally, we're ready to launch the engine. So we'll invoke the bootstrap engine method and pass in the engine instance name and the context. All right, so let's jump to that second important method called publish items. So the first thing we'll do is we'll retrieve the publisher application object from the current engine's list of applications. Then from that publishing app, we can create a publish manager instance. And then finally, we will reload the publish tree we saved in Maya. Next, we will be writing a generator function. If you recall earlier, we saved the entire publish tree, which included both the items that were published locally and items that needed to be published on the farm. If we're about to publish the scene, we want to make sure that we'll skip over all the items that have not been submitted to the farm. So here we write a simple generator that will yield only the items where submit to farm is set to true. Now that we have written our generator, we can pass it to the publish and finalize method, and we're done. At this point, if we launch our script, it will load the scene and publish everything to Shotgun. So that's it, folks. We're finally done with the entire workflow. Okay, so obviously there's more work that needs to be done before this hook is actually production ready. One major problem with it is that the submit to farm UI takes over the entire UI of the plugin. So if the plugin you are wrapping with this actually has its own custom UI with the current implementation, it would just go away. So obviously this is not acceptable. So in the more advanced version of that wrapper, we could create a tab widget where we would put the publisher settings, and the first the first tab would probably be the base hook UI, and then on the second tab you could have your render farm settings, and then that's it. So if you want to learn more about the publishing API, you can visit our developer portal and visit developer.shotgunsoftware.com/dk-multi-publish. We'll link to this on Shotgun Dev and in the video description on YouTube, so don't worry. If you want to try you can find today's material on GitHub under Shotgun Software /tk-config publish API webinar. Again, don't worry, I'll post that information. We will also link to a pull request on that repo so that you can see the changes before and after all the changes I've made, basically. Sorry. Note, by the way, that this is using a special version of the publisher that isn't released yet. This is because we found a bug while we were making this webinar. So the code is currently being code reviewed. If you want to try this out for yourself and you want to pick up that repo and use it, you just need to make sure that you can git clone from Toolkit if you want to try this out, because it's using the Git branch descriptor. Once you release the application on our App Store, we will update that configuration, and then Git won't be required anymore if you want to try this out. Speaking of trying this out, it is very easy. So today, if you go to our repo and you download the zip file for it, you can then go to your project, create a pipeline configuration, upload that zip file to Shotgun. And then once it's uploaded, you launch Shotgun Desktop, you jump inside Maya, and then the Work Files 2 app will open up. You'll open up your whatever file you want, and then you can go and launch our publisher, hit publish, and if you go through the logs, you'll see everything we've just written today. So like going through this process here, obviously I fast forward through it, but doing this takes maybe like 2 minutes. So like maybe 5 minutes from now, if you want, you can try this out for yourself. So I would like to thank all of you for coming here today. Hopefully my French-Canadian accent didn't get in the way of explaining everything. So we're now open to questions. Over to you, Tanas. Are there any questions?
Well, we don't have any questions so far. We have plenty of time. So if you guys have anything that's on your mind about this stuff, now's your chance to hear it from the source itself. Anything? Anyone typing their last bits right now? No? Okay, then. All right, we have no questions. It was a perfect webinar that covered everything so well. Everyone understands everything there is to know about using the publish on the farm. Okay, then, that's it. We're done. Thank you so much, JF. That was awesome. Stay tuned. I threw some links into the chat. One for the first one, it doesn't look like anything, but that's the Shotgun Dev Google group. And then the other two are from JF's webinar, the publish documentation for the API and his repo in GitHub for this webinar. Stay tuned on Shotgun Dev and on all the places that you hear from us for the next one of these. And as always, if you guys have ideas of things that you'd like us to cover, we always want to hear. And that's it. You get your 26 minutes back. Have a wonderful day, evening, whatever it happens to be, wherever you are.
Thanks, everybody.
See ya.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.